I'm Kelly, a 43-year-old mother of two. I'm married to Larry, a kind and patient man who has been my constant support for almost 22 years. Life has had its ups and downs, but I've always believed that it's the people in your life who make the hard times easier to bear. At least, that's what I thought. Until my brother Scott decided to shake things up. Scott is 10 years younger than me, a whirlwind of bad decisions and misplaced priorities. He's always been the kind of person who thinks the world owes him something. Growing up, Mom used to say he'd grow out of it. But here we are, and at 31 years old, he's still the family problem. I remember thinking, maybe he'll get his act together. But deep down, I knew better. Scott never learned. No matter how many times we tried to support him, he always found a way to disappoint us. It was a Sunday afternoon when everything started to unravel. You know, the kind of Sunday that calls for a family gathering at Mom's house. Her house was our safe place. It was where we spent most of our childhood. I could still remember the smell of fresh-baked cookies in the air, and the sound of Mom's laugh echoing through the walls. It was a home full of memories, both happy and bittersweet. We always looked forward to these Sundays, sitting down for a big meal, sharing stories from the past, and just enjoying the warmth of family. This time, as usual, Larry, the kids, and I were there, settling into our familiar spots at the dinner table. Mom was in the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on her famous roast. The kids were already talking about school and their latest hobbies, while Larry and I were catching up on the small details of our daily lives. It felt like the kind of day when everything is right in the world. But that feeling didn't last. Out of nowhere, the front door of Mom's house flew open with a loud bang, the kind of sound that made us all jump in our seats. The door slammed against the wall, and then, there he was, Scott, swaggering into the room like he owned the place. He had that same cocky smile on his face that I had seen so many times before. The one that always made me feel like he was up to something. But it wasn't just Scott who was standing there. He wasn't alone. Clinging to his arm was a young woman. I could tell she was barely out of her teens. She had a wide grin plastered on her face, but something about her just didn't feel right. And it wasn't just the way she was dressed. Too much makeup. A dress that looked more suited for a nightclub than a Sunday family lunch. No, there was something else. Before I could fully process the situation, Scott raised his voice with that obnoxious, over-the-top enthusiasm. "Family, meet Olivia," he said, as if he were introducing the next big thing. "My new girlfriend." My heart skipped a beat. The words barely registered at first. Olivia? Was he serious? The whole room fell silent, and I could feel everyone's eyes on Scott and this woman he'd brought with him. I looked at Larry, who had just taken a sip of his tea. He choked, spluttering in surprise. I quickly reached out to pat him on the back, but I could see the shock on his face. I turned to look at my kids. Lauren, who was 13, stared at the woman with wide eyes. Her curiosity piqued. "Mom, is she going to be an aunt?" she asked innocently, her voice cutting through the tension. Eric, my 10-year-old, seemed more interested in the woman's outfit. "Why is Aunt Olivia's dress so shiny?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. Mom, who had just come out of the kitchen, froze in the doorway. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. She had always been protective of us, especially when it came to Scott and his chaotic decisions. But she said nothing. Not yet, anyway. Scott seemed oblivious to the tension he had just caused. He grinned, clearly proud of himself, and motioned for Olivia to sit down next to him. I could feel a knot tightening in my stomach. Something wasn't right here, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Larry cleared his throat. "Scott," he said slowly, his voice calm but with an edge of concern. You're dating someone new? And this is the first time we're hearing about her?" Scott waved a hand dismissively. Relax, Larry. Olivia's great. You'll like her. He sounded so sure of himself, but there was an underlying tension in his voice, something I couldn't ignore. The way Olivia sat there, her hands resting on her round belly, was starting to make me uneasy. It was only then that I noticed the subtle curve of her stomach. She was pregnant. My mind raced as I tried to piece it together. How had this happened? Was this why Scott had brought her here today? To drop a bombshell on us all? Before I could ask anything, Mom finally spoke. "Scott, what's going on?" Her voice was calm, but I could hear the worry behind it. She wasn't fooled by Scott's bravado, and neither was I. Scott's grin faded slightly and he shifted in his seat. "Well, Mom, there's more," he said, his eyes flickering between us. "Olivia's pregnant. We're expecting a baby." I felt the air leave the room. The weight of his words sank in, and for a moment, no one knew what to say. The room was thick with silence, and all I could hear was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Olivia smiled, almost too wide, and placed a hand on her belly. "I'm so excited," she said, her voice high-pitched, as if she were trying to convince herself more than anyone else. "This is a fresh start. A fresh start." That's what Scott always said. Every time he made a new mistake, he called it a fresh start. But we all knew that nothing ever changed. The cycle would continue, and we'd be the ones left to clean up the mess. I wanted to scream. How could he do this again? How could he keep dragging us into his world of chaos? But instead, I stayed quiet. Mom's gaze never left Scott, and I could see the disappointment in her eyes. I wasn't the only one who saw through his act. But then, something strange happened. As the conversation continued, I noticed a shift in the room. Scott's usual arrogance began to wane, replaced by an unfamiliar unease. He wasn't as confident as he had been when he first walked in. In fact, he seemed almost nervous. I could see it in the way his hands fidgeted with his napkin, and the way Olivia's smile faltered when the room grew silent. It was like they both realized, for the first time, that this wasn't just about them. This was about family, and family meant accountability. For the next few minutes, the conversation drifted. We all tried to get back to normal, asking Olivia questions, trying to make small talk. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Scott kept glancing at Olivia, and I noticed how tense he looked. It was almost as if he were waiting for something. Waiting for a reaction. Finally, Larry spoke up again. "Scott, do you even know what you're getting yourself into? Are you sure about this?" Scott's eyes snapped to Larry's, and for the first time there was a flicker of doubt in his expression. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. It was as if he couldn't find the right thing to say. Olivia, sensing the shift, quickly jumped in. "Scott's a great guy. He'll be an amazing father," she said, almost too quickly. But the way she said it, something about it just didn't feel genuine. It hit me then. I wasn't just worried about Scott making another mess of his life. I was worried about Olivia. There was something off about her. Her nervousness, the way she kept shifting in her seat, it all pointed to something more. Something Scott wasn't telling us. And then, the truth hit me like a freight train. Olivia wasn't just pregnant. She was hiding something that Scott didn't want anyone to know. And I had a feeling that the bombshell was just beginning.